discussion of storytelling podcast boom in India. We would like to begin by thanking you all for being the part of the fifth edition of Pixels, digital entertainment reaching a new peak. We would like to thank our title partner Booth, Platinum partner Amazon Prime Video, CX partner Zendex, content delivery partner Limelight Networks, Gold partner Lionsgate Play and Shimaru Entertainment. Without any further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce you to May Thomas, founder Made in India, who will be the moderator for today's discussion. Joining us today, we have a brilliant set of leaders with us. Please welcome Sreeraman Thiagarajan, Chief Executive Officer, Avaz.com, Rishi Sharma, Lead Creator, Economy and Special Projects from Ghana, and Soumini Sridhara, Paul, Senior Vice President, Hungama Digital Media. I would request all the delegates to keep posting their questions in the chat box, and the panel will answer some of them in the end of the session. Over to you, Ms. May.
With me. Okay, so firstly, thank you so much for the introduction, Ayushi, and I'm so excited to have three incredible guests with me, Soumini, Sreeraman, and Rishi. I feel like the only time I get to catch up with people in life, because it's so lame, is on panel discussions. That is my life right now. But I think I wanted to give a little sort of, when we're talking about the podcast boom, I think it's been significant mainly in the last 5 years. Whether it's audiences discovering the medium or audio streaming apps investing in original audio shows or just new podcasts being created. And I thought I'd maybe start this session with just throwing out a couple of stats. Firstly, last year, Vox Nest did this mid-year review called The State of the Podcast Universe. And in this 24-page document, India cropped up in one stat. It was the second fastest growing podcast listenership in the world. Also, number one, Turkey. Who knew? Then, of course, I think last year, 2020, podcast apps like Gaana, Spotify, JioSaavn all saw a 42% increase in time spent on their platforms. Also, there were twice as many new English language podcasts that were started in 2020 compared to the previous year. Many languages saw a very high increase in podcasts being created. Hindi grew by 14 times. That's double the growth of podcasts that are in Chinese or Spanish language, plus new languages in India like Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Kannada, and even Assamese and Bhojpuri. So I'm excited today to sort of chat to you guys about like where and how the boom is taking place in podcasting, what's making the biggest impact, and how is the storytelling medium going to grow. So firstly, I want all three of you to answer this question, but I want to start with Soumini. What is the kind of growth that podcasting has witnessed in India?
So, I think the numbers were already well defined by you, so I'm going to, steer away from that. But I think, we see what's happening even with a lot of these audio platforms, whether you look at Clubhouse or what's happening with Spaces with Twitter or Facebook. So definitely audio is a medium that surprisingly actually is getting a lot of attention. Surprising for the reason that radio was there for a while and that should have, continued to grow. But I think radio has seen a certain element of stagnancy. And I think the biggest reason for that is the format and the medium through which you're able to experience it, right? The concept of sitting at home and listening to radio is somehow possibly not something that has really, been adopted. And radio still continues to be something on the move and doing your traffic times and all of that, and of course there are a lot of replacements for it, right? There's streaming platforms, but I think what is possibly the reason why podcast is gaining a lot of momentum is, one, of course there are players who have given it that visibility, and that is the starting point. If there's no one who's going to present it, there's no way to consume it. But in terms of the different, topics and different areas, it's also, if you just see in the last 2 years, the way life has changed for people, psychology itself has become such a common word, because everything comes down to people's psyche, how do they deal with situations like pandemic and all of that. So I think that's where the podcasts are playing a role of, kind of being, it's kind of self, solution giver. A lot of people will possibly run to psychiatrists or psychologists, and now possibly podcasts are becoming, a one-to-one source. So, but having said that, I'm sure, it's still a long way for it to become commercially viable. And to become, but having said that, I mean, I'm sure Sriraman will have a different point of view, since we pretty much run a platform which is more or less about podcasts. But I think, there are two ways to look at it. It's like how radio became with someone like 94.3. They became the only international station, and that gave enough of a positioning, as against to just being another radio station, right? So I think that's
Yeah.
where it's going to, and possibly you'll start seeing, players who specialize in certain kind of podcasts. Right now, we are
Yeah.
in the space that everybody's offering podcasts and saying, "Come to me and listen to me." But as time evolves, as people start wanting to consume more, you will possibly have specialists, just like we're seeing in the OTT space.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Since you very beautifully pointed at Sriraman, let's make a glorious segue. And I'd like you to answer the question to get sort of your point of view on what is the kind of growth that you're seeing. Particularly, I think I want what would be interesting for me to understand because of the kind of content you have on like Avas. What do you feel like are the differences between maybe listenership in say your bigger metros versus like a tier two, tier three, and maybe rural parts of the country, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So, so many got us into a right track of starting with radio. I think what's happening is, or rather, how we see it is, the unbundling of radio. Okay, radio has three components: the local news and updates, the RJ talk and chat shows, and music. Of course, now music is being offered in variety of ways, right? Playlist, or you can listen offline on demand on Gaana or Spotify anywhere. So music has been well addressed. Now there are only two components left: your local news and updates and your RJ, right? So um, on top of this, we also have audiobooks and spoken word and audio fiction. So you know of all the things, the only thing we, or rather the two things we don't do is this local news and updates or audiobooks. So ours, we look at everything spoken word, whether it is fiction, conversational, and of course in different languages. So we, it's good you asked me about urban, non-urban. We see that mostly in urban we see content which are upskilling in nature. For example, we have a lot of content called conversational masterclass, where if you want to learn about, let's say, blockchain, there's a podcast about 2 hours long in 4 or 5 episodes. There's an expert talking about blockchain, there's an expert talking about cloud, there's an expert talking about brand building. These kind of content is usually in English, and it's got a completely urban audience uptake. But if you look at my Hindi, Urdu, Marathi content, it's almost like a Star Plus, Sun TV, or a Sony. We have fiction, we have serialized stories, we have devotion, so on. So that GEC kind of content that appeals to mostly non-urban, non-metro locations. But
Yeah.
most of my urban audience are still in the upskilling space. I mean, we spoke to some of our audience. What they said is, when they're doing their household work, chore, walking, they might as well put their time to good use by listening to something that informs them, right? And
Yeah.
one last thing. So I said this unbundling. So we are unbundling this with some of the FM players. For example, the most crucial element that makes FM tick, which is your RJs. We in fact have something called Awaz Live, where we have partnered with Fever FM from HT, and we kind of do live talk shows where RJs come and do antaksharis and other kind of talk shows. So the whole unbundling of radio, I think it has happened well now, and let's
Hmm.
see where we go from here.
Super. And Rishi, I think what would be interesting to kind of understand a little bit more when we're talking about growth and the boom is it where are like the key demographics of like listenership, whether it's like where they're located who they are. So I'm kind of like curious, like when we're talking about growth, but growth like where?
So it's actually interesting. So the growths across the entire. So what we see is it's not a specific group or a specific cohort which has grown a lot. This growth has actually come across the entire spectrum. So you see people across different ages. You see people who have an affinity towards a different kind of a topic. Could be urban, could be tier two, tier three. The growth's actually coming across the entire spectrum. And I think I want to add to one of the points I mentioned earlier. One of the most interesting parts is that people are now covering any topic that you can think of. And each and every topic that you can think of has a niche audience. That niche audience is developing a following, and those cohorts are growing independently. And it's because each of these individual cohorts, apart from the larger pillars that drive podcasting, these smaller niches are actually adding significant value in terms of how much the content is consumed. So we see the highest followership, highest repeat listening of content, the longest amount of time spent on this content coming from these smaller audiences as well. The larger pillars, of course, have grown. People have started listening to it. People have become more aware of this format, are now investing their time into listening to content which is like storytelling, which is doing exceptionally well. But very interesting things like how to be a dad for the first time. Right? I thought that was an extremely important topic, and the sort of following that people have for that, and now they're listening to what you do with a 2-year-old, and the podcast is 2-year-old. So things like that and smaller topics and niche topics like that have actually significantly grown the entire universe of podcasts, both from creation as well as development.
Absolutely. So this is what's so interesting. So like having like, when you brought up radio and podcasting, that key difference, like even something that I've noticed having been in radio and, coming to podcasting is that, and just echo what Rishi's saying, is like specificity of like content, right? Like it's not like you're like, let's try to get everyone and like those broad, big brushstrokes, right? It's more about how can I build this community and build that loyalty within that community. So this is a question that I don't know how comfortable or uncomfortable it's going to make us, but I have to ask it, which is that are successful podcasts only made by influencers and celebrities, or can anyone make a successful podcast? Who should I throw this to? Maybe let's try with Soumini.
God. So, I
And I'm gonna
think
get you, Rishi.
I think the concept of influencers is about time, right? You got to you don't become, you're not born an influencer, right? It's something that you've been at, and people have started finding some kind of stickiness to you, and they like what you do, they think what you speak and whether it's the YouTube influencer or a TikTok influencer, whatever today, right? I think if you look at it, every platform, whether it's long form, short form, or audio, there's just one formula. You pick a strategy and you stick at it and you stay at it and you keep at it, because that's what make people kind of there's a sense of predictability, but at the same time, when you're bringing that kind of content, even if it's predictable, you're bringing some kind of nuance and you're connecting to the consumer on that. So I think I don't believe the concept is that this is something that only influencers can do. I think if you found your niche and you're at it, you will grow into becoming an influencer. And we are seeing this. I mean, if we see the entire influencer business that has picked up over the last 2.5 years, we literally have now, a definition for depending on how many followers you have, right? There's nano, there's micro, there's macro, and there's all of these different labels to it. But the truth,
Yeah.
the truth of the fact is, it's all got to do with the size of the community that you have, and you wanting to grow it and get bigger and bigger and bigger. The interesting part about this is that can somebody, I think the beauty lies even in radio today, where you see RJs, like when I look at someone like Rishi,
Yeah.
he he does a video of his interviews. Nobody ever thought of doing stuff like that earlier, right? No, even when we had video cameras and we could have shot and we could have, I don't know. It's just that everything is all stitched in together today. Yeah, there's a very thin line between a video content and an audio content. So I don't think it really matters how people are able to connect to a community, but
Yeah,
definitely you can become an influencer as a podcaster. You can.
Yeah,
fair
I
enough.
agree. I mean, people may, most of them start a podcast to become an influencer, right? So by definition, what
Mhm.
influencer is somebody who has the ability to shape opinions. So you are, let's say, you are good at food, you start a food podcast. You are good at parenting. I think Rishi is in search for them. So maybe you want to share your experience. Maybe you want to
Rishi,
share your
I mean to say,
experience.
do I have to be
Yeah.
a celeb or an existing YouTube influencer with
Doesn't have
millions
to
of
be, right? That's what I'm
followers to
saying.
like,
Let's say
yeah,
I'm a father to a 9-year-old child. I have good parenting experience now. So imagine I know that there are audience wanting to listen to this.
yeah,
Maybe my wife and I will pull a mic on a weekend and start creating it, and crowdsource some questions, then answer them, debate it out, saying how does a dad look at
yeah,
it, how does a mom look at it, how did our parents look at it, and if people who are listening they have their point of view, maybe invite one or few of them over the next episode, so on, right? So you become and maybe in a year's time I'm a influential in the parenting category. I don't know.
Yeah.
So people start
I
a
mean,
podcast to
yeah,
build cloud as well, not just those who already have cloud start a podcast. So
So
both
I
ways.
yeah, so I basically
yeah,
look at
Rishi,
two ways. You have existing influencers who may be influencers because of a different format. They might get some more momentum, but that momentum would be largely driven because of their influence on those formats, right? Once they come to
yeah,
podcasting, yes, they might have some momentum, but I go back to what Soumini said. It's definitely a format and where you need to have patience and you need to be rigorous.
yeah.
So it's
Okay.
going to take you. It's going to take you. May you've been doing this. I mean, you know this better than any of us, right? But it's. But what I'm saying is, it's going to take time. Is the audience there for you to become an influencer? The audience is definitely
Yeah,
there. The I think the loyalty that the audience has with the podcaster is extremely high, often higher than what you would see on other formats right now. I think
yeah,
that fact that you have that loyal base that will listen to what you do, what you say, and they continue to do that for years now. And most of the people who are influencers in podcasting, we know them once they've done 300 episodes, once they've done 400 episodes, right? It's taken the
totally.
time, they've been rigorous, they've answered the questions, they've connected with their audience, they've understood what's going on, they've made content which is topical, they've made content which has shelf life. I think it's a combination of all of that, right? You need to have that patience. And the influencers from podcasting will then also look to expand to other platforms where they will have to again face the same battle. But then you'll find certain people will find their strength in podcasting as their primary source of influencing people, and that's going to be a large group of people as well. So that's the way I
Yeah.
look at it. Sure.
No, and I agree with you on this whole thing of how um, the idea of like multimedia, right? Like even if you're doing a podcast, you have video that's attached to it. If you have a video, then like, okay, if I have a YouTube channel, what am I doing differently on my podcast that I'm not doing anywhere else? So a lot of it is kind of like all feeding into each other a little bit. But there's something that I want to actually pick up from what you said, Rishi, which is that like people need to be patient when they're building their audience in podcasting. It's not like you put a tweet and then you're like, okay, now people will comment, like, and retweet. Like it's not like that. Podcasting and building that community, like you drop an episode, people are just going to be like rushing to your podcast to listen to it. That's not going to happen. So one of the things that I know that I have struggled with to be able to communicate with people about this is that podcasts success metrics aren't the same as video platforms or social media. So how do we measure the success of a podcast, or are we still sort of tied to like the numbers game? I'll ask Rishi since I'd picked on what you'd said.
I think it's going to be a mix of two. I think it is important to look at the numbers. I think you should look at the numbers differently when you're looking at podcasting. So some of the ways that you should look at them is how many of your users come back, So how many of your users are actually repeating? How many of them are coming back? I think we've seen internally that if you have followers on the show, or the way followers of a podcast behave as compared to people who are listening or just trying it out, it's significantly different. So those are the guys who are loyal to you. Those guys are the guys who want your content, see the problem solving that's happening out there. I think another important factor to see out here is, don't try and aggregate every single event. Try and aggregate it over a little longer period of time. Considering the format is new, it needs more attention to consume. So try and see how many minutes or how many episodes someone's consuming over a higher time frame. So maybe over a minute. And if you can get into some of the insights and nuances of your content more specifically, to see where is it on average that people are dropping off. Is it something that people are looking for you to switch? Do you need to introduce a new angle somewhere in between? Was there certain context or certain content that clicked a little bit more with people? I think
Yeah.
some of those are very, very strong. Asking people to share your content and trying to see the information from that. Are people now pushing your content? They're so proud of the fact that they've heard the podcast. Are they pushing that forward? I think, considering it's starting off, right, we're still in the early years of podcasting. We need to see both the numbers to make sure the content is great, but also to see the qualitative side of it. Are people proud of being on this platform? Are people proud of promoting the content? And wherever we see in that sort of an experiment where we or ask and work with a few podcasters closely to try and see how this works out, we've seen positive results. Of course, a lot of experiments fail, but these were some of them which did work out positively for us. So I would actually look at it, think of your content both from a qualitative perspective as well as a quantitative perspective. Test your content out, see what's working, what's not working. Also push your audience, test your audience
Yes.
out. That's what's happened in the Western markets, right? They give you a link, they ask you to go to a website. There's a lot of action, a lot of task expected of a user to do that. That tells you the intent. That really shows you the intent of where your listener is coming from, and then that gives you insight about how you could probably take the next step.
Absolutely. Soumini, do you have anything to add to that? Soumini or Sreeraman? Just start with Soumini about
Yeah,
metrics.
so I think a lot of what she said is possibly, for someone who's actually serving podcasts through the platform will be using those parameters. But if I was to look at it from a podcaster's perspective, right, because it is a huge challenge and it's a journey, right? And I think it's similar to how you talk about a YouTuber. You have to have a calendar, a plan, a strategy. You've got to be consistent. And every time, I mean, forget about the fact that the platform is going to be looking at the numbers or the brand is going to look at what's the KPI and all of those things. If you, as a podcaster, want to start off, definitely have to be, first of all, have to have a hard skin, because not everybody is going to accept it or be responsive to what you're trying to say. But I think
Yeah.
it's so similar to the way you grow a YouTube channel. It's I don't see it any different. It's just that the format is different, if at all. I'll give you an example, and I'm not going. I mean, it's not like a sales pitch here, but something that we're doing currently, as a part of a independent music initiative. We've started a show in partnership with a radio station, and it's been 2.5 months, and we're seeing gradual growth, and there is a mix of radio and video on it. Um, but we know, both the partners, we know that this is something we're going to have to be engaged in, and we're going to have to see it grow over a period of time. It's not going to happen just because we are two existing brands. Even that is a challenge, right? So if you're talking about in a similar parallel of an influencer who's known, and
Yeah.
you're trying to be a podcaster because you're known, it's not an obvious transition, because people are still going to look at you. We've seen so many singers who've tried to make it as an actor and haven't worked. So it's a similar kind of model, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean
Fair enough.
that's
And Sreeraman, I mean, when you're looking at like metrics of success within podcasting, what have you kind of noticed, and how do we can
Yeah,
change like the way people actually look at metrics and like how we consider something successful in podcasting?
I have multi dimensions to it because as a platform, for us, content is, we see it as a form of CAC, or a customer acquisition cost, because we produce original content. So we see that, okay, I spent, let's say, 100 rupees on creating this content. How many new audience am I able to fetch with this, right? Did it unlock a new demographic, or a new market, or new audience? Or sometimes we even look at retaining our audience, because we know there is a good completion rate for a particular series. Then we work really hard to keep that series going on, so that improves our retention rate in our app, right? So all of this overall increases the app's DAU MAU, which of course I monetize it differently, right? So that's one way to look at it for content that is created by us in house. And then
Yeah.
we have brands that work with us to create branded content. For them, it's all about reach and engagement, as simple as that. So
Yeah.
again, two metrics: we don't compare ourselves to a video because it's nearly impossible. Like, for example, even a JCB video on YouTube has 20 million views, which is right, which is maybe small for that YouTube scale and size. Maybe it should be 200 million by now.
Yeah.
But if we look at our platform, we say that, look, 100,000 people heard your content with 72% completion rate. So if we look at it that way, it's almost 7,20,000 minutes if a episode is 10 minutes and there are 10 episodes. So imagine this: you have a stadium and there are 100,000 people sitting there, and you had their attention for that long, and they heard you,
Yeah.
right? So that's the kind of depth we talk about to brand, not a skippable 6-second ad, but somebody heard your content for 70 minutes. So those are another way to measure it. And very final but very simple measurement for us is also, uh, you know revenue content generates for us, like licensing deals or things like that. So yeah, so customer acquisition and retention, reach and engagement, and finally revenue. So this is what we measure at ours.
Interesting. So one of the things that we talk about, and we were earlier talking about, how, understanding sort of growth in podcasting in terms of, um, you know, where and what the demographics are of the people. But I want to kind of look at um, podcasting in terms of like the kind of content that we're actually, that exists in the audio universe right now in India, which is that I'm kind of curious as to, as I'd mentioned earlier, there were more and more podcasts that are coming out, like 14 times more podcasts coming out in Hindi and in other languages. And I'm curious to kind of understand, are there, like, obviously there are more and more podcasts that are coming out, and I wanted to kind of understand, like, where are all these like new podcasts being made? Like, are we getting more podcasts in different languages? Like, whether, like I'd mentioned, like the Assamese and Bhojpuri podcasts, which I wish I could understand the language because I would love to listen to those podcasts. But I wanted to understand the sort of um, not only the breakup of understanding what are the kind of like languages the podcasts are coming out in, but like what is the kind of listenership? Because when we look at English, it's nothing compared to your sort of audience in Hindi. So, I mean, Sreeraman, because you do stuff in so many different languages, I'm kind of curious as to what you've been seeing.
Yeah, May. So I think if you go back 10, 12 years ago in the video space or blog space, we were in a similar situation. There were two kinds of content being created. One is the tent pole, let's say institutional companies create, right? So we
Yeah.
still had Netflix back then. We still had few content creators who would create high quality original content. Let's say today we are looking at Spotify original, for example, or
Yeah.
we almost all originals, right? So it could be a Gaana original, Avaz original, Spotify original. A lot of time, efforts, money put into creating like a 50-minute content, right? And then look at the long tail. For example, parenting content that we were talking about. That could be started by anyone. So same as in the blog space, right? Initially, anyone could have a blog, write about their pet, write about their travel, write about their home, kitchen garden. They could write about anything. And then there were few senior journalists or some authors who took up blogging as a full-time job.
Yeah.
So similar things happened in video right now. For example, we know a lot of people who have left their job to become full-time YouTubers, full-time Twitch streamers. They across, it's not just esports, they stream a variety of things. So it's almost like that. We see, organized players like us creating tentpole content, and of course everyone and anyone the entry to create a podcast today is next to nothing. I mean, you don't even need a mic. You can speak in your laptop and you can record it. You can record in your phone, enough and more tools. So I think it's a combination that's going to drive, because the long tail will bring in more people to sample it, and maybe they will change their mind saying, okay, a podcast was not that bad. Maybe that will help create habit because they are getting some content that they appreciate, they like. Um, and now, of course, language is just another step in this. The more languages, it's better because more people will discover or find it comfortable. It only reduces the entries of barriers of entry,
Right.
right? So I think we are going in a good shape. The proxy for this is, I've seen what YouTube was in 2010 or 12. I think we are in a similar situation right now.
Got it. Rishi, do you have anything to add in terms of like the kind of
Yeah,
emerging
I mean,
language?
I mean, I agree with what Sreeraman is saying, but two things that I'd say are really a couple of things. Like, I think storytelling is something that's really working well. So people wanting to listening to horror, thriller, true crime in all languages. And it's beyond Assamese and Bhojpuri. You have stuff in Haryanvi, you have stuff in Bengali, you have lots of stuff, and anything to do with performing arts, right? So when you have poetry, beyond the stories, when you have things like comedy. And I think one of the major reasons is these formats, a lot of the times the creators are very well prepared with the fact that it's performing arts. And like what Sriraman said, is for the other verticals, people are getting more used to it now. And slowly, in a short duration of time, you'll see that they're much stronger with their scripts, they're much stronger with their edits, they're much stronger with including soundtracks, and the overall content package is a lot more complete. And once that happens, these verticals are definitely going to come in and have a similar distribution to what you would see on YouTube. I completely agree with that. I think the tail has just started, and as these guys get more experience, we're just going to see a very strong uplift. And the English content that you see from India, it's not long before these guys actually become global influencers. Right now, we're speaking more about the Indian space and for them to try and capture
Yeah.
more of the Indian market. They're going to become global influencers, and even local languages or the regional languages, you have presence across the world, and that's where their presence is also going to stand out. Very similar to YouTube again. So I see it. I actually see both of them happening. It's like we said earlier. It's about a little bit more time as they get more used to the format. They get more experience. They get the insights from their listeners and followers. That's just going to blow up as well completely.
Awesome. And Soumini, since we're talking about the sort of understand the diversity of content, something that I'm super curious about is that diversity isn't just in terms of like maybe just subject matter or language. I think diversity is also to some extent about different voices, whether it's the LGBTQI community, whether it's tribal, whether it's mothers, whether it's art, Dalits, whatever that may be. So I'm kind of understanding because podcasting, like Rishi was saying, is a great storytelling medium, is a great place for people to sort of dabble in. Do you think there's more of that diversity as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when Rishi was speaking, I was just thinking about how the journey started for independent music. Right? There was nobody. We started it, and today there are at least 7 or 8 players. I see a similar kind of thing happening with podcast, and I think it's been much faster than what we saw in the independent scene. It's like
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't know who to credit, but I think the visibility of Spotify's podcast just made everybody. Yeah, you are not.
Soumini, like, who to credit me?
You are like you're an army. You're not a podcaster. You're an army of all kinds of art forms. Yeah. But I mean, I feel it's interesting to see how competition of a business actually grows opportunities for talent. And today, the more democratic the artist can be, there's just so much opportunity. So I think podcast will grow and become viable as long as the platforms are willing to have the patience to make it grow. Because the talent is there immense, and I mean, with digital, it's beyond boundaries, it's beyond geography. And that is going to be the fun aspect, for people to. It's like how we're seeing shows on Netflix today,
Yeah.
which are Spanish and Mexican and Korean and all of that. Of course, video
Exactly.
games subtitle. It'll be interesting to see how people will, listen to other languages. But I think the whole regional boom itself is a testimony, right? Because we saw it with TV, we're
Yeah.
seeing it with radio. I mean, radio today itself has to go regional. If you're not playing Kannada music in Karnataka, you're not going to get any listeners, right? So it's very interesting to see how people are actually recognizing the consumer and saying, okay, yes, you are the king, and so content will be served for you as well. And that has to be kind of replicated in any kind of form, whether it's a podcast, whether it's comedy, whether it's poetry, any kind. And television has already kind of done that, right?
Yeah. So even like when we're looking at the sort of diversity in terms of podcasting, when you're talking about promotion and audience acquisition, all that, I'm kind of curious, what and in what way are apps supporting podcasters, particularly to Rishi and like Sreeraman. So Rishi,
Uh, I think we've given in a lot more effort towards the second half of this year, to be fair. Uh, we were working more on fixing the platform and stuff. And after speaking to podcasters, we realized that they're actually looking for two key things from any platform. They're looking for it to be their marketing tool, number one. And the second thing they're looking for from it is to eventually generate revenue, right? Like they need to generate some revenue from this. So we're doing a couple of things. I think one thing I can tell you now, one thing you'll probably know in a couple of weeks, uh, to support these two. So we're doing very strong outreach programs to podcasters, trying to help them out, trying to get some time with them, do one-on-ones. I personally try and do at least 5 one-on-ones in a week, uh, to spend some time with these guys, understand what their issues are, what do they want, how do they grow. So we're really working very hard on personalization and getting personalization right on our app. We're also working very hard to identify the music listeners who would potentially like a certain type of podcast and push them to the right place. So if you're listening to romantic songs, there's a very high chance you would like a romance based podcast. There's a chance we'll give that chance to the podcaster, and then as things work, we'll give the same chance to other podcasters. So these are some of the things that we're trying to do within the application. We want to increase the number of podcasters who are on the app. We track that regularly. That we bifurcate them to try and see how many more can we actually push and not keep only a few podcasters with all the content and all the content consumption. So I think it's important for us to do more outreach. We've not done it in the most structured way right now, which we would do now. We're doing a lot of work to also monetize and help these guys to monetize, which is something that I think 2022 is going to be very important for podcasters. Maybe till 2025, where the entire ecosystem has to get set up that helps podcasters get themselves in front of the right brands and actually turn revenue from there. So these are two important areas that we're working on. And we've not sufficiently achieved what we want to, but we're definitely getting there. Those are the two verticals that we want to track.
okay, Sreeraman, how do you think apps are helping podcasters?
Sorry, May.
So I was this similar question, which is how do you think apps are able to support podcasters?
Absolutely. Okay, I come from a different space where we pay the artist upfront, so there is no
They're
sharing
like,
of
that's how I support them. I pay them.
yeah, it's
That's pretty
almost
good.
like we are like a production house or a movie studio, however you want to call it. As
Fair enough.
we
Yeah.
look at artists, we hire their services, they get paid. It's quite off right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Whether we make money from it or not, artist has no bearing on that. So for us, it's very different model. I'm not saying everyone should follow this. Not gonna work, because we, like I said, we prefer to build our own IPs over a very long period, not hyper scale in a short term by aggregating stuff. So very different business models. But yeah, I think what Rishi is doing is good. Exposing them to the right audience is a huge first step for people to get
Yeah.
listenership. And I think listenership is the least common denominator for any creator. If they are able to get it, everything else starts falling in place. Let's say, again, going back to the same parenting content, let's say currently there are only 50 people listening to it, and if Ghana was able to get them to even 5,000 listeners, I think a brand would be very happy to sponsor that, because getting 5,000 moms' attention or dad's attention for half an hour is
It's huge.
nearly
Yeah.
impossible, especially if you're a parent to a toddler. So, I mean, I think platforms should take attention to create discovery. Of course, there is merit. Poorly produced content, no matter what you do, will never succeed. But there are a lot of content
Absolutely.
out there which definitely has merit but has been not discovered. So I think platforms should do something about it. Yeah.
Okay. Just one last question that I have for all three of you, which is that what are your sort of predictions, I guess, for the future of podcasting? And since lovely Ayushi is here, this is time to keep it very brief. So she's like, time's up. No. So just your sort of like quick, what you're kind of looking forward to, what you hope to happen in the future for podcasting. Soumini?
Yeah, I think as long as there are platforms and there's artists, podcast is going to just get bigger and bigger. We will have to get the consumers to it. So that's it.
Rishi?
I think. Sorry. Rishi, go ahead.
That's. I think the revenue angle is going to be critical. I think bringing the revenue in, supporting the medium through that in a format is going to be critical. I think there's a lot of positive movement on that. The next 3 years I see as being really, really strong in generating the right brand revenue, generating the right revenue overall for this industry. I mean,
yeah, I think the flywheel effect, more creators, more content, more listeners, more ads coming in. I think we're just in the beginning of that stage. I think once that flywheel sets in, there is no stopping it. So let's say 2022 is a great year for podcasting.
Yeah, and hopefully I can meet all three of you outside this panel discussion also, because this is ridiculous.
Yeah, in person or
for sure.
Well, thank you so much to Sreeraman, Rishi, and Soumini for being part of this panel with me. Ayushi, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, May.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you everyone for such an engaging discussion today. Very special thanks to our panelist and our moderator for being here with us today and making this possible. Another thank you goes to all our attendees who are here with us. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.